After countless days of trying every single thing that I could possibly come up with and everything that I had seen on YouTube prior, we finally found a team that made it through 105, dudes. Let's take a look. What's going on, guys? This is Arkaden, and today we're going to talk through floor 105, which I thought 102 was going to be the most RNG that existed. Dude, 105 is worse. I mean, now mind you, the rewards are pretty good. I have to give it to them. 20 molas, 30 leafs. Solid rewards for this particular floor. But getting through it is literally one of the most toxic, cancerous. I actually wanted to pull my own hair out of my head. I'm sitting in Discord, literally just like finding myself dropping F-bombs. The most frustrated I've ever been. This floor has done it to me. To try and ease a bit of that RNG, we're going to talk through a team that I've come up with today with the help of several other people in the Discord that worked well for me not having Spectre Tenebrea. I'm just going to be honest with you. It's going to probably be some characters that some of you may not have. And I wish that there was another way of doing this. I really do. But I'm going to give you the options. I'm going to tell you the different ways that we've found that like can work, and then why we decided to go with the route of characters that we did. So the first thing on our team is going to be our healer. Depending on if you go a more reviver route, depending on who your front line is, you may not want to use Tim. You might consider like Ruel. Some have considered Maid Chloe, just because she also has stun potential, and stun actually helps you going into the first phase and the second phase as well, although pretty inconsistent on a Maid Chloe. We decided to go with Tamerinne, mostly for the fact that A, we can put Shamadra's staff on her and have a little bit of extra effect resist, as well as like a little extra healing, but more than that, because every healer gets that out of the Shamadra's staff. The biggest thing is B, the reality that she has the ability to cleanse off buffs, or debuffs rather, every once in a while. She has the ability to buff with attack buff. She has CR push of 50% every time she uses her idle form S2, and then also has the ability to strip off the reflect from the BBK with her S1 in the later phases. Tamerinne, I know we say this a lot, but Tamerinne had incredible utility for this particular floor, and being that she is on banner right this second, like as we are in game, which I realize won't be the case for everybody watching this, but right now she's attainable. Get this character. We've said before that she's a PvE goddess. She may not have her place as high in the PvP realm right now, but oh my gosh, she just insanely useful for this floor, and you'll see that as we step into this and go a little further. One other thing you may notice with my Tamerinne is if you've seen any of my videos prior to this, I actually have much worse gear on her normally as a PvE character. However, you need speed, you need the effectiveness, and as much effect resist as you can get on this character. I would say my effect resist was actually low. I get stunned multiple times in a lot of the attempts that I take, but I needed to make sure that I had the effectiveness as well, so that when I'm using my S1, once we actually hit the BBK phase, like we definitely need that S1 to strip every time. And I'm actually technically 3% away, I believe, from that being good. Actually, no, I think we're actually okay, because I think she has 75% effect resist, so I think we had enough for that. But all in all, fast, healthy for better heals, as well as good effectiveness, good effect resist is going to be solid for her. So next up on the list is going to be Arbiter Vildred. And now before I get all the hate comments, all right, I understand Arbiter Vildred is a tough one to actually come by, as well as like a non-necessity for this fight as far as completion goes. I went with it so that I could kill two birds with one stone and give myself a little bit of utility that I didn't have elsewhere. Let me explain. If I go with Tamerinne to be able to have all of the utilities as a healer as well as a pretty good healer, that means I don't have space for a Ruel. If you have the ability to bring in Ruel and you have some other tanky characters, then you might be able to put a tank up front and be able to put like a plus 30 Proof of Valor, or if it's an actual knight, you could put on Sword of Ezra, something to be able to make it survive a couple of the what people have kind of nicknamed the suck ability by the Scorpetra, where she brings you in and then just like clamps you and kills you. That is a way, is you can try to either make yourself survivable, or you can just put yourself in a position where you're like, I got Ruel, I'll res. In my case, I wanted to have the utility of the Tamerinne. So keeping Tamerinne, I decided, okay, I have to either have something up front that can just survive on their own because I don't have the ability to res, or I have to do somebody like Arby who can actually just like stand up front, be a damage dealer, which you need damage dealers in this anyways, but if I can be a damage dealer and I have enough time to survive long enough between each suck to actually get my passive to come back, then I actually end up killing two birds with one stone. So I did use Arby because I think that was an incredibly intelligent pick for up front. Somebody in the chat on one of our streams suggested, so very big suggestion there. That was super, super good. Another option that you could use, which I've seen this on other YouTube videos, you could use like Ambitious Tywin to be able to get rid of some of the debuffs as they come in, as well as but you have to make him really, really thick, because again, he's a light unit going into a dark unit, so that's going to be tough. The other thing that I thought was also brilliant was using something like Fat Cat up front, because Fat Cat, as long as everything else doesn't hit him before he gets a chance to hit the boss, will automatically, the Scorpion will miss and use the miss ability, so you can take like 3 or 4 almost like hits by that Scorpion before the damage is too high ramped where he'll actually get killed even on a miss. So couple of really good things there. Again, Arby was super huge. We absolutely went with Dust Devil. This fight is loaded with RNG, so the best thing that you can do is load more RNG against that RNG to sort of counteract it. So in the case of Arby, being able to S1 multiple times when you're hitting 2 targets at a time with his S1 is huge. Having the blind debuff on his S3 was also huge, depending on what phase of the fight you were in. All in all, great damage dealing character who had a lot of potential to do even more if that Dust Devil procced. Next up was Dizzy. You'll notice also with my Dizzy that I changed out her gear as well. She is much less tanky, is not even a tank at all. She actually has a lot more attack and a lot more crit damage than she had before. Also, we raised up her crit hit chance significantly as well. Not because Dizzy is going to be your main damage dealer, but any extra damage you can get in this fight is so huge, because the quickness of phase 2 and how fast you have to beat it is kind of crazy. It's actually really hard to beat a boss in like 8 turns. So making sure that you're ready for that. Dizzy does a great job of debuffing the whole time, does a great job of pushing back. Not necessarily any of the mobs that you're going to really deal with in this, but has the ability to push back and roll back your debuffs to give them an extra turn. That's pretty amazing, as well as just the sheer amount of ability to stun on her S1. So between the stun on her S1s, and then I definitely suggest Abyssal Crown. You could go with Eyeless to be able to get rid of some of the buffs that BBK could get as like a chance to get rid of them, but I still think if it was me, I really got a lot more value out of making sure that the ads were stunned more regularly than I did out of kind of trumping the ability that Tamerinne could already get rid of buffs by putting that on Dizzy. So I still think Abyssal Crown is still the right answer here on Dizzy personally, but all in all, great character for this. She is even a little faster than I have her normally, but again, you'll notice I'm not pushing a 270 Dizzy. I'm using like a 220, and I'd say that's more than reasonable. All of my characters kind of sit in this like 218 to 220 range. You'll see as we go through, but Dizzy, very, very necessary for this comp. So the final character that I picked for this composition that works really well, ended up being just a huge damage dealer, but also we utilized her for utility a lot here, was Luluca. You'll notice I changed her gear around a lot too. She is actually at 208, so a little bit slower, but that was just mostly due to the fact that I just didn't have the gear for on top of all the other fast gear I had to make for all the other characters. She does have a good amount of attack, does have a decent amount of crit hit damage, and I did make sure to full Mola her S1. I didn't have that prior, but I did do that for her this time around because, hey, I use Lulu for a lot of things, and having all of that damage, that execute damage on the S1 is nasty, as well as the stacking, like extra attack and stuff that you're going to get out of using her S3 a couple times early in the fight. So we went with Luluca over like Fire Tenebrea. A lot of people will use like Fire Tenebrea, Spectre Tenebrea, things that also have the ability to wear these Abyssal Crowns. We put an Abyssal Crown on Luluca instead, because even though you get a little bit more pushback and you get a lot more of the speed down, defense break, there's a lot more consistency to your defense break on Luluca than Fire Tenebrea due to the fact that it's on her S1, and you can put that EE that also gives you a 35% chance to actually S1 again, just for even more chances to keep that defense break up. Between Luluca's EE and the general reality of having Arby on Dust Devil, we have a couple of just crazy things. Like, those things can interact with each other so well, where it feels like one character can do like 2 attacks while the other person also gets 2 attacks at the same time, where you're getting like quad attacks in one. It feels really good when it goes off. It's not horribly common, which is why I suggest as much as you can, get that EE for the Luluca and try and plus 30 if you can, that Dust Devil on the RB. But lots of other options. To talk about other options that can work in a lot of these places, like you are using Luluca and you're obviously using Luluca and you're using Dizzy in this comp to get a lot of stuns early. A lot of people did decide that they could maybe use Ravi for that, because Ravi can be good damage and also stun. I just found that consistency-wise, Ravi just did damage, but the stuns were too inconsistent. It was really hard to be able to keep up with everything. So Ravi was a tough call for me, although I do think that Ravi in the right scenario could be good. You just miss out on kind of all the other debuffs that sort of slow the damage coming through with Dizzy. So this is why I went this route, and I'm going to show you guys the 105 fight now. It's still going to be frustrating, boys. This is still going to take, even with this comp, probably multiple tries. So as we jump into phase 1 of this fight, you're going to notice that there's going to be 3 of the little luminous scorpions as well as Scorpetra, which I think the last time we saw this boss was, I believe, back in the 80s when we were doing the 80s floors. Couple things that you should note on this particular boss, and we'll just start right off with like the little guys first. The pincer assault that they do attacks with pincers with a 50% chance to make the target unhealable for 1 turn. That's just their regular attack. Being unhealable is kind of a big deal early on, especially if you don't have a lot of extra cleanse, because obviously if you're unhealable, you can't take nearly as many hits. Thankfully, with Arby being in here, Arby can kind of be okay with this, because as long as he survives, then you're good. It's really just when he dies and his passive is on cooldown, that's when it gets a little bit tough. The Venom Stinger is their 3-turn, and it does apply poison to targets, but also if something is already poisoned, it will detonate those poisons as well as repoison from there. So being that there are 3 of them and they're going to be all shooting them at different times, that can be problematic. So you'll want to kill these scorpions, at least with this strategy, right off the bat. This is definitely you want the scorpions dead, because to be able to deal with Scorpetra, you need Arby to have his passive up so that if he dies, he comes back. So let's talk about Scorpetra here for a second. Couple things. As she attacks, she grants stackable increased attack and speed at the end of the turn, which is ginormous. That means that her damage is only getting higher and higher the longer this fight with her takes. As well as Steel Skin, which makes her immune to all effects except for stun and sleep. So you can't defense break her, you can't poison her, you can't do any of that stuff. Also, if the caster is stunned or slept, changes combat readiness of the caster by, to 30%. This effect can only be activated once per turn. So when you do stun or sleep, it does actually push the boss backwards in CR, which is great until you realize that if the caster is stunned or slept, when attacked, it'll greatly increase your damage that you do to her, but also it increases the caster's combat readiness by 20%. So every time you hit the boss and they are stunned or slept, it will actually move them forward even faster on the combat readiness bar than normal, than if they were just not stunned or slept. However, the damage is also greatly increased, so it does still become very beneficial to make that happen. So keep that in mind when you're fighting her. The other things to note are her abilities. So she has one ability that attacks everybody. With Dark Energy, it decreases combat readiness by a random amount between 20 and 50%. After the attack, it stuns enemies with 10% or less combat readiness for 1 turn. That is going to be really hard to be able to stop that stun necessarily from coming out, just because with it being just kind of random as to the amount between that it's going to actually move people back and forth. And depending on where you are in the CR bar when this happens, this can be semi-problematic. As much as possible, you want to be able to resist that. That is why we're using a Shamadra staff on Tamerinne to get the extra healing as well as more chance to resist. This ability is kind of a pain. Second one is attacks 2 enemies, including the target, with a shockwave emitted from the pincers with a 75% chance to decrease defense for 2 turns. It can't trigger a counter attack, but honestly, which is amazing, I have to say, especially if the ads are up. But honestly, the big thing with this is that it does put decreased defense up on the characters. And being that we are kind of fast, we are going to be lapping enough to kind of get rid of that. So the decreased defense is actually kind of okay. We're sort of okay with this. The Sever is the better ability to get hit with than the Flash Beam. Flash Beam is more difficult to deal with. And then finally, the ability we were talking about earlier, which was called like the Suck ability, is actually called Destruction. And it dispels all buffs from the person who is in the front line before attacking with a strange power. Penetrates defense by 100%, attacks the front row first, so it will always be the person that's in the RB position, at least as you're seeing it here, and then it ignores effect resist. So with 100% defense pen, dispelling all the buffs off, you really have to have a character that can take a hit, or in the case of RB, not take a hit and just come back. We're actually totally fine with that. So that's the reason why RB is up here and why this works. So thinking about how these things sort of interact, what you want to be doing as far as this particular composition is you're going to be constantly cycling on Tamerinne to A, get a whole bunch of souls, but B, to combat readiness push all of your people forward. As much as you can combat readiness push and add attack buff, the better. That's super, super good. With Arby, you're going to be focusing, again, all of your damage dealers for Arby, Lulu, and Dizzy. You're going to be focusing on killing the adds first. And anytime that you get like a nice, good stun on the Scorpetra, or a sleep when you see that she's on the combat readiness bar and she's about to kind of pass somebody, or maybe a damage dealer that you're using is like just before she's about to lap, make sure you hit the boss, because then you're going to get a lot of extra added damage there. And then of course, once all the adds are dead, then you'll just be forcing all that damage onto Scorpetra as it is. Long story short, the reason you have double Abyssal Crown for this is so that as much as possible, you're going to be trying to S1 with the Dizzy and S1 with the Lulu once all the adds are dead. Prior to that, you'll be using the S3s on both characters, and then of course the S2 on Dizzy to be able to sort of like increase the amount of times and turns the debuffs have. All in all, this phase is kind of frustrating with this composition because there's always the chance that the adds just straight up kill Arby, and then you just can't do anything about Scorpetra. Also, Scorpetra, if you're not keeping her regularly stunned throughout the entire rotations, and she's getting off any of her other abilities, not just the S3. The S3 almost becomes relatively trivial if you're keeping her stunned the whole way up to that S3, because that's only ever going to hit Arby, and Arby will come right back, so that's fine. It's the other abilities that hit the whole team, because you don't have any real damage mitigation, that become kind of problematic. So if you're going to lose in phase 1, it's going to be due to some unfortunate RNG that's going to just like hit one of these characters in a way that just ends them before you have a chance. So keep in mind, this phase is usually about 10-ish minutes, and then we'll talk through phase 2, assuming that you've made it through phase 1. The final thing that you want to think about during this first phase as much as possible is, as you're stacking souls, you want to have a full filled out bar of souls by the time this is done. Also, if you can, you want to also have popped Dizzy's S3 right before, like the turn before Scorpetra goes down, because if Tam goes twice, it will actually, even if you thought you had a third ability to stay in idle form, it will actually force her back into her regular form when you move into the next phase. So Tam can only go once after you've actually turned her into idle form to be able to remain in idle form going into phase 2. If you can get that, that's super, super huge and helps a lot, because you obviously get the dual attack guarantee right off the bat when you start, as well as if you need a little heal or even a large heal, you can actually burn with Tam there right when we jump into the next phase. So keep that in mind. You want all of the souls that you can, meaning literally a full bar. And if you can get Tam right there at the end, that's going to be the ideal push phase. I would say even if you can't get the ideal, still move into the next phase, but that's going to be like money. So as we enter into phase 2, the RNG only continues to be more frustrating to deal with here. You're going to end up running into BBK and 2 of these now Watcher characters. The luminescent one is the yellow one, and then of course the purple one is the obscure Watcher. So what do those 2 Watchers do, and how do we deal with them? So the Watchers have a passive on the luminescent one when the caster's health is 30% or more, meaning literally this thing's health is over 30%. All enemies will receive no combat readiness increase effects other than those provided by their speed stat, and no extra turns. So you don't get any extra turns. Damage suffered in one attack does not exceed 25% of max health. So you're trying to basically crush this thing down as fast as possible, and it's really hard to like fully do it in one turn, but as fast as possible. The yellow luminescent one is your main target. The purple one does also have some skills. When the caster's health is 30% or more, just like with the luminescent one, all enemies cannot use passive skills or be granted effects that decrease cooldown, reset cooldown, or cause cooldown not to occur. Things to note here: some of these affect some characters on your team, and some of these affect other characters on your team. As long as the yellow one is up, and while the yellow one is up, you really can't do any kind of burns on Dizzy to be able to try and get extra turns, so don't even bother. If you're going to use S3, just use S3. Don't waste the souls. If you're using Tamerinne, you can use idle form right off the bat, but it's only going to just turn you into idle form. It won't give you actually the second turn. So again, the yellow one is really, really frustrating. Also, the yellow one's ability kind of attacks 2 enemies and dispels 1 buff before dispelling 1 debuff from all allies. So regularly, the luminescent Watcher is getting rid of your buffs while also dispelling off of itself and other characters, which is super frustrating, especially when you're trying to land these defense breaks. These defense breaks are like one of the most important thing to be able to kill the Bloodblade Corinne fast enough, because the Bloodblade Corinne is only going to go 8 times before she just totally ruins your entire day. So basically she'll fill up her S3, she'll S3 you once, and then she'll fill that up again. The hard thing to deal with here is when the dark purple one is alive, and it gets a chance to attack, it will actually sort of boost the BBK. And when the light one is alive, it's going to be continuing to get rid of debuffs. Your biggest goal here and the things that are going to set you apart is when you can get multiple stuns off on both of those. When you get stuns on both, it actually feels like it slows down the fight significantly. I get that getting that is kind of difficult, and also making sure that you can land dual attacks with the 35% chance on Luluca is also difficult, and also getting Dust Devil to proc at a 30% chance is also very difficult. So you are relying on a level of RNG that is just like, can I keep these things actually under control? Because if you can't, it becomes very difficult to deal with. But if you do end up getting it, you'll notice it feels like the fight slows down quite a bit. For the BBK, things to note is the very first time they'll attack, she'll go with her Blade Art Flash, which slashes the enemy, increases attack of the caster for 1 turn, and then activates a sequential cutter as an extra attack. The one nice thing about having Dizzy on your team here is that you're going to be putting up a lot of debuffs up on Bloodblade Corinne, so hopefully she doesn't just straight up one-shot Arby or Lulu or Dizzy, because they're both kind of squishy in this composition. I didn't have any troubles with that. As long as we were landing debuffs, we were actually fine, but that basically means she's going to hit one person, and then she's going to hit that same person twice. That happens on a 3-turn rotation for her, so just try and pay attention to that. The other one she have is a Sequential Cutter, which is the second half of that first ability we were talking about, which strikes the enemy with a sword, recovering health proportional to the damage dealt. So much like normal, that's a Bloodblade Corinne ability. The S1 basically gives her a little bit of health back. It's not a lot, but it is still some. And then, of course, her S3, the Blade Art Dragon, 4-turn cooldown, attacks all enemies, dispelling all buffs before decreasing the caster's current health by 5%. Removes 20 souls. So you want to try and get rid of your souls before she does her first actual S3, at least to the most of your ability. If you're finding that you don't need them to continue to move forward at best, then save some of them, because it's nice to be able to use Tamarinne's S1 for survivability in the second phase, but you will be down 20 souls after that first Blade Art Dragon comes down. Note also that all allies are immune to poison and unaffected by increase in damage proportional to max health, so there's no reason to use a Daydream Joker here, as well as you can't Curious this floor, but there is still some potential with Spectre Tenebrea. Is what a lot of people would do in this, is actually land like a target debuff and a defense break on the BBK, and then they're able to sort of use all of the souls in the Archie bar to basically just like cycle the S1s on BBK and do a ton of extra damage, even if you don't get to land the poisons. So just keep that in mind. Also, as health decreases, casters attack, defense, and speed increase, and decrease the amount of healing received by all enemies. After attacking heals the ally except for the caster with the lowest health. Amount recovered increased proportional to the damage dealt. When an enemy uses a non-attack skill, dispels unable to be buffed from the caster before granting reflect for 1 turn. You can debuff with cannot be buffed, but it won't stop the reflect from coming. And the reflect is one of the most frustrating parts of this. So a lot of the reasons that we're using some of the characters that we are here is because they don't use a lot of non-combat skills, except for Tamerinne. Also, if you're burning with Tamerinne, you can actually get big heals on her S1. So keep that in mind. If you heal with Tam, it is going to actually put up a reflect. If you use the defense buff with Luluca, it will also put up the reflect debuff. So if you're going to, and you'll notice that we use this relatively intelligently on our side, if you're going to actually transform Tam, understand that the transform will put up a reflect buff. So you're going to have to use the S1 directly afterwards to strip it and then use for the dual attack. All in all, this phase requires a lot of defense breaks to land. It requires a little bit of luck, especially if your damage dealers are looking anything like mine, where they're not crazy fast and they're not crazy damagey. But I guess if you had a lot better gear, this could be a little bit less RNG and a lot better. Long story short, that's the fight. You're going to be trying to take them down as fast as possible. As soon as you see that the yellow one is dead, you can jump into immediately using burns for the Dizzy. You can also start utilizing Tamarinne's S3, because now you can S3 into her S1, so you can actually get rid of the reflect. It's actually really good. And then, of course, as much as you can, do as much inevitable damage to the purple one, but more than anything, if it can be stunned, hopefully it gets stunned. If not, it's just going to push the boss and you're just going to have to restart. So a lot of RNG in this fight. I would say in general, good luck to everybody that is doing this one, and understand that this was just a way for us to be able to add a few levels of RNG to our favor, considering how many layers of RNG there are in this fight. I feel almost like a hypocrite saying, so that's it, because that's it is just ridiculous for this floor. If you haven't tried this floor yet, I'm just going to tell you in advance, try to stave the frustration. Understand that everyone in the community thinks that this particular fight is just loaded with RNG and is exceptionally frustrating. There are good compositions that can help with a lot of the things, which is what I think this composition brings. However, I also understand that it is still a lot of layers of things that have to land exactly as you need them to be able to actually work it through. And the amount of time it takes to get through this Scorpetra phase for almost anything is longer than you ever want it to. However, this is actually a semi-faster one to get through that as well too. So keep that in mind. I hope this was something you guys enjoyed. I'm so sorry it took us this long to get it out, but make sure if you guys do, like, comment, subscribe. Tell us, guys, if you have any other like amazing strategies that we can add into here, or some other characters who really have been helpful. Feel free. I know we had theory crafted the idea of like Blue Dominial for the 1000% hit. Like, what if we could put a reflect up? But unfortunately, she dispels off the buff, which, dang, that would have been really cool. But love theory crafting and love hearing all of your guys' thoughts. So we'll see you guys in the next video. Peace, guys.